I need to get this off my chest because I'm still processing what happened last weekend. For context, I'm 34M single, and I've always been the family disappointment compared to my siblings. My sister Michaela just got engaged to her boyfriend Reed, and my parents threw this big engagement party at their house. What I discovered that night has completely changed how I see my family, and honestly, I'm still figuring out my next move. Let me give you some background first. I've known for years that my family sees me differently, but I thought it was just typical sibling dynamics. After my younger brother Carlos died in a car accident 3 years ago, things definitely shifted. He was everything my parents wanted in a son, married his college girlfriend at 25, had 2 kids by 30, worked in finance, lived in the suburbs with a white picket fence. The golden child who did everything right. When Carlos died, I took it harder than anyone expected. We weren't even that close growing up, but losing him hit me like a truck. I went through this really dark period where I basically became a hermit, gained weight, let my apartment turn into a disaster zone. My family kept telling me I needed to get my life together, that Carlos wouldn't want me wasting my potential like this. So I did exactly that. I threw myself into work, started hitting the gym religiously, cleaned up my diet, moved to a better apartment. Over the past 3 years, I've gotten promoted twice and I'm now regional manager for a mid-sized logistics company. I'm in the best shape of my life, make decent money, have my own place in a nice area of town. But apparently none of that matters to my family because I'm still single and childless at 34. My parents have always been subtle about their disappointment in my life choices. Little comments here and there about how it would be nice to have grandchildren, asking when I'm going to settle down, making jokes about me being the eternal bachelor. My sister Michaela has been more direct. She's always acted like I'm this sad case who can't get his life together, even though by most measures I'm doing pretty well for myself. So when Michaela got engaged to Reed 6 months ago, I knew I'd be expected to play the supportive older brother role. Reed seems like a decent enough guy, works in sales, drives a BMW, treats Michaela well as far as I can tell. They've been together for 2 years and my parents absolutely love him. He's basically the son-in-law they always wanted, especially after losing Carlos. The engagement party was supposed to be this big celebration at my parents' house. About 50 people invited. Extended family, family friends, some of Reed's relatives. My mom had been planning it for weeks, and of course I got volunteered to help with setup. I showed up Saturday morning at 9 to start moving tables and chairs around, setting up the backyard, decorating, all the usual grunt work that somehow always falls to me at family events. I'd been helping for about 3 hours when I realized I needed to grab more folding chairs from the garage. The party was starting in an hour, and we were running behind on setup. I went through the kitchen to get to the garage, but as I approached the door, I heard my dad's voice and stopped. He was talking to my Uncle Rhett and a few other relatives who had arrived early to help. Here's where it gets interesting. I had my phone in my pocket, and I'd been using the voice recorder app earlier to make some notes about a work presentation I'm giving next week. The app was still running in the background, which I didn't realize until later. So when I heard my name come up in their conversation, I just stood there and listened. My dad was going on about how I'm basically a genetic dead end. He said no woman wants damaged goods who can't even give her children. That I'm clearly not capable of maintaining a relationship or I wouldn't still be single at my age. My Aunt Linda was laughing about how I'm 34 with no wife and no kids, saying I'm not a man, but a cautionary tale for other families. She actually said that. A cautionary tale. Then my mom chimed in. This is the part that really got to me. She said she stopped hoping for grandchildren from me after Carlos died, like his accident somehow made me defective too. She said Carlos was the one with good genes and family instincts, and I'm just the leftover son who can't figure out how to be a real adult. The whole group was just tearing me apart, analyzing my failures like I was some kind of case study, but it gets worse. My sister Michaela came into the kitchen and joined the conversation. She laughed about how at least I'm useful for manual labor, that I might not be able to get a girlfriend, but I can move furniture and set up parties. Reed, her precious fiancé, chimed in saying, every family needs their charity case to make the rest of them look better by comparison. My uncle joked about starting a GoFundMe with the title, Help This Pathetic Bachelor Find Love. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes, listening to my entire family mock every aspect of my life. They talked about how weird it is that I spend so much time at the gym, like I'm compensating for something. They made jokes about my apartment being too clean and organized, saying it proves I don't know how to live with another person. They even brought up how I don't date much, speculating about whether I might have some kind of emotional problems that make me incapable of relationships. The whole time I'm thinking, these are the people who I've been bending over backwards to help for years. Every time someone needs furniture moved, I'm the first call. When my parents needed help renovating their kitchen last year, I spent 3 weekends doing free labor. When Michaela was moving apartments, I took a day off work to help her pack and transport everything. And this is how they really see me, as the family charity case who's useful for manual labor but otherwise a disappointment. I just smiled and walked back outside like nothing happened. Finished setting up the party, made small talk with guests as they arrived, congratulated the happy couple, posed for family photos. The whole time I'm thinking about what I'd just heard, but I kept my expression neutral. Years of being the dependable brother had taught me how to hide what I was really thinking. After the party ended around 11 that night and everyone left, I went home and sat in my apartment thinking. I pulled out my phone to check my work notes and discovered that the voice recorder had been running the entire time. I had about 4 hours of audio, including that entire 10-minute conversation where my family destroyed me. I listened to it probably 20 times that night. Every cruel word, every laugh at my expense, every casual dismissal of my worth as a person. I saved multiple copies to different devices, uploaded it to cloud storage, made sure I had backups. Then I sat there thinking about what to do next. See, the thing is, I've been angry about how my family treats me for a long time. Since Carlos died, they've acted like I'm the consolation prize son, who can never measure up to what they lost. I've been working on myself, building my career, getting my life together partly because I knew eventually there would come a day when I'd need to stand up for myself. I just didn't know it would be like this. I spent the rest of the weekend planning, not some elaborate revenge scheme, but thinking about what boundaries I need to set and what conversations need to happen. These people have been taking advantage of my help while talking behind my back, and that ends now. Tuesday morning, I get a text from my mom asking if I can help move some furniture this weekend for a friend of theirs. Usually, I just say yes without thinking. This time I replied that I'm not available for manual labor anymore, and if they need help, they can hire professional movers. She seemed confused and asked what was wrong, why I was being difficult. Wednesday, my sister called asking if I could help with some wedding planning stuff. She wanted me to drive around town picking up decorations, moving supplies, basically doing all the grunt work while she handled the important decisions. I told her no, I had other priorities that weekend. She got snippy and said I was being selfish during her important time, that family is supposed to help family. Thursday, my dad called saying he needed help cleaning out the garage and couldn't understand why I was suddenly being difficult. He said he'd been counting on me to help sort through Carlos's old stuff that they'd been storing. I told him I wasn't being difficult. I was just done being the family charity case who does manual labor while everyone else gets to relax. That phrase made him go quiet for a long second. Then he started backtracking, saying he didn't know what I meant, asking where this attitude was coming from. I didn't elaborate, just said I wouldn't be available for family labor anymore and hung up. By Friday, the whole family was texting and calling, trying to figure out what was wrong with me. My mom left a voicemail about how family helps family, and I was being unreasonable, that they couldn't understand this sudden change in my behavior. My sister sent me a long text about how she couldn't believe I was making her engagement about me, that this was supposed to be her special time. The thing is, I haven't even played my ace card yet. They have no idea I heard everything they said, no idea I have it all recorded. They just know something has fundamentally changed, and they're starting to panic because their reliable manual labor source has suddenly grown a backbone. I'm planning to let this simmer a bit longer before I make my next move. Right now, they're all confused and scrambling to figure out what shifted. And honestly, watching them sweat a little feels pretty good after years of being taken for granted. They're about to learn that the family charity case has been paying attention all along. Update 1. Thanks for all the support on my last post. A lot of you said I should stand my ground and not let them walk all over me anymore, and honestly, that really helped me feel like I wasn't crazy for being angry about what I heard. This week has been absolutely wild. And I need to update you all because my family's reaction has been way more intense than I expected. So when I left off, I'd started refusing to be their free manual labor, and they were getting confused and frustrated. Well, that was just the beginning. By this past weekend, things escalated big time, and I'm starting to see just how dependent they've become on having me as their go-to problem solver. Saturday morning, my dad showed up at my apartment unannounced, just knocked on my door at 8 in the morning like that was a normal thing to do. When I opened it, he immediately started talking about how he needed help moving some heavy furniture down to their basement and couldn't understand why I was being so difficult lately. He said my mom was really upset about my behavior, and they were worried something was seriously wrong with me. I told him I'd already explained that I wasn't available for manual labor anymore. He got this confused look and asked what I meant by that. Like I was speaking a foreign language, so I spelled it out for him. I said I'm done being the family member who gets called whenever there's heavy lifting or grunt work to be done. I have my own life and my own priorities. He tried to argue that family helps family, that this is just what we do for each other. I pointed out that it's pretty one-sided help, that I can't remember the last time anyone offered to help me with anything. He got defensive and started listing off times they'd help me, but most of his examples were from years ago or things like birthday dinners that were really just normal family stuff. The conversation went on for about 30 minutes right there in my doorway. He kept trying to figure out what had triggered this change in my attitude. He asked if something happened at work, if I was having money problems, if I was depressed about being single. Every time I told him it wasn't about any of that, it was about setting boundaries and not being taken for granted anymore. He eventually left, but not before saying he was going to talk to my mom about having a family meeting to figure out what was going on with me. The idea that they needed to hold an intervention because I stopped volunteering for free labor was pretty telling about how they see me. Sunday afternoon, my sister called, and this conversation was even more revealing. She started off trying to be sweet, asking how I was doing and if everything was okay. But it quickly became clear she was fishing for information about my sudden unavailability. She said she'd talked to Dad and he was really concerned about my attitude. I asked her what specifically she was concerned about. She said I was being selfish and difficult, that I was putting my own comfort above family obligations. I asked her to explain what those obligations were exactly. She got flustered and started talking about how families are supposed to support each other, how we've always been able to count on each other. So I asked her when was the last time she'd helped me with anything. She got quiet for a minute, then said she helped me emotionally, that she was always there to listen when I needed to talk. I almost laughed because I couldn't remember having a serious personal conversation with her in probably 2 years. Our interactions were basically her asking for favors and me saying yes. The conversation got more heated when she brought up her wedding planning. She said she was counting on me to help with setup and breakdown, that it wasn't fair of me to abandon the family during such an important time. I told her she had months to figure out alternative arrangements, that she could hire people to do the work she'd been expecting me to do for free. She got really upset and said I was ruining her special day, that she couldn't believe I was being so selfish during her engagement period. I asked her why my labor was so essential to her having a good wedding, why she couldn't celebrate without me doing manual work. She couldn't really answer that, just kept saying it wasn't fair and that I was changing the rules on everyone. Here's the part that really got to me, though. She started crying and said she didn't understand why I was being so mean to everyone, that we used to have such a good relationship. I realized she genuinely believed we had a good relationship, when, from my perspective, it had been me constantly doing favors for her while she treated me like the family loser. Monday, my mom texted asking if I wanted to come over for dinner to talk about what was going on. I agreed, partly because I was curious to see how they were going to handle this as a group. When I got there, both my parents were clearly prepared for some kind of intervention. They sat me down in the living room and my mom started talking about how worried they were about my recent behavior changes. She said they'd been talking to Michaela and everyone was concerned that I might be going through some kind of mental health crisis. The fact that they jumped straight to mental illness because I stopped being their unpaid help was pretty incredible. I asked them to be specific about what behaviors were concerning them. My dad said I was being uncooperative and hostile, that I was refusing to help family members who needed assistance. My mom said I seemed angry and distant, that I wasn't acting like myself. I told them I was acting exactly like myself, just with better boundaries. I explained that I'd spent years dropping everything whenever someone in the family needed manual labor, and I was done with that dynamic. I said I wanted to have relationships with them that weren't based on me being useful for physical tasks. They both looked genuinely confused by this. My mom said she'd never asked me to do anything I didn't want to do, that I always seemed happy to help. I pointed out that I'd never said no before, so how would she know if I wanted to do it or not? She didn't have an answer for that. My dad tried a different approach. He said that helping family was just part of being a good person, that everyone has to do things they don't necessarily want to do. I asked him what he'd done lately that he didn't want to do for the family. He mentioned helping my mom with some yard work, but when I pressed him on it, it turned out he actually enjoyed gardening and had chosen to plant the flowers she wanted. The conversation went in circles for over an hour. They kept trying to frame my boundary setting as selfishness or mental illness, while I kept asking them to explain why my free labor was so essential to our family relationships. Neither of them could really articulate why me refusing to move furniture was such a crisis. The most telling moment came when my mom said she just wanted things to go back to normal, that she didn't understand why everything had to change. I asked her what normal looked like to her, and she described exactly what I'd been complaining about, me being available whenever anyone needed physical help, me being the reliable one who never said no. I realized they weren't upset because they thought something was wrong with me. They were upset because they'd lost their convenient solution to any problem that required manual labor. They'd built family plans around my automatic availability, and now they had to actually think about alternatives. When I left that night, they were still confused and frustrated. They kept asking what they could do to fix whatever was wrong, but they couldn't accept that nothing was wrong. I was just setting boundaries they weren't used to. Tuesday at work, I got a text from my uncle Rhett. He said my parents had asked him to reach out because they were worried about me. He wanted to know if I was having financial problems or needed someone to talk to. I texted back that I was fine, just setting some healthy boundaries with family obligations. He called me that evening and we talked for about 20 minutes. He seemed genuinely concerned, but also confused about what the big deal was. He said my parents made it sound like I was having some kind of breakdown, but when I explained what was actually happening, he didn't see why everyone was so worked up. I think he gets it more than my parents do because he's not as directly affected by my unavailability. He told me he understood wanting to have more time for myself, but suggested I might want to ease into the boundary setting more gradually to avoid family drama. I appreciated the advice, but told him I was done easing into things. The interesting thing is that through all these conversations, not one person has asked me if something specific happened to trigger this change. They're all focused on getting me back to the old dynamic rather than understanding why I wanted to change it in the first place. It's like they can't imagine that I might have legitimate reasons for being unhappy with how things were. I'm still sitting on the recording of their conversation from the engagement party. Every time one of them tells me how much they care about me or how good our relationship has always been, I think about what they really said when they thought I couldn't hear them. The contrast between their public concern and their private mockery is pretty stark. Next week is Michaela's bridal shower, which my mom has been planning for months. She texted me yesterday asking if I could help set up tables and chairs. I told her no, and she asked what she was supposed to do now. I suggested she ask the other family members who would be attending, or hire someone to help with setup. She said it wasn't the same, that she was counting on me, and didn't know how to handle all the logistics without my help. I realized this might be the first time she's had to organize a family event without automatically assuming I'd handle the physical labor. It's going to be interesting to see how they adapt. The family meeting Dad threatened is apparently happening this weekend. Michaela texted me that everyone wants to sit down and figure out what's going on with me. I'm planning to attend, partly because I'm curious to see how they frame this situation when they're all together. I still haven't decided when to reveal that I heard their engagement party conversation. Part of me wants to let them keep digging this hole deeper first. Every conversation we have where they talk about how much they care about me just makes their real opinions more hypocritical. They have no idea that their family charity case has been paying attention all along, and that everything they're saying now is being measured against what they said when they thought I couldn't hear them. Update 2. I can't even begin to describe what happened at the family meeting this weekend. Remember how I said I was sitting on that recording from the engagement party? Well, I finally decided it was time to stop playing games and let them know exactly why I'd changed my behavior. The fallout has been absolutely nuclear, and I'm still processing everything that went down. So the family meeting was scheduled for Sunday afternoon at my parents' house. My mom had been texting me all week about how important it was that I come, how everyone was worried about me, how we needed to work together to fix whatever was wrong. I agreed to attend, partly because I was curious to see how they'd try to handle this as a group, but mostly because I'd decided this was going to be when I dropped the bomb. I spent the week preparing for this conversation, not just emotionally, but practically. I made sure I had multiple copies of the recording saved everywhere. I thought through exactly how I wanted to present it, and I mentally prepared for their reactions. I'd been angry about their treatment of me for so long that this felt like something I'd been building toward for years. When I got to their house Sunday at 2, everyone was already there. My parents, Michaela, Reed, Uncle Rhett, and even Aunt Linda. They'd arranged the living room like some kind of intervention setup, with me getting the single chair facing everyone else on the couch. The whole thing felt pretty theatrical, but I went along with it because I knew what was coming. My dad started things off by saying how concerned everyone was about my recent behavior changes. He said they'd all noticed I was being uncooperative and distant, that I seemed angry about things that had never bothered me before. My mom chimed in about how I was refusing to help family members who needed assistance, that this wasn't like the person I'd always been. Michaela got emotional, talking about how hurt she was that I wasn't supporting her during her engagement period. She said planning a wedding was stressful enough without having to worry about whether her own brother would help with basic tasks. Reed nodded along, saying he was confused about why I seemed to have a problem with him specifically. They went around the circle sharing their concerns and observations. Uncle Rhett said I seemed bitter about something but wouldn't talk about what was bothering me. Aunt Linda said I was acting selfish and needed to remember that family comes first. Everyone had theories about what might be wrong, work stress, depression, jealousy about Michaela's engagement, some kind of midlife crisis. I sat there listening to all of this for about 20 minutes. They were talking about me like I was a problem to be solved, analyzing my behavior and motivations without actually asking me what was going on. Every time someone mentioned how much they cared about me or how good our family relationships had always been, I thought about what they'd really said when they thought I couldn't hear them. When they finished with their concerns, my dad asked what I thought was behind these changes in my attitude. He said they all wanted to understand so they could help me work through whatever was going on. The whole group was looking at me expectantly, like they were ready to solve my problem and get back to normal. I pulled out my phone and set it on the coffee table. I told them I wanted to play something for them before we talked about my attitude. I could see confusion on their faces, but they agreed to listen. I started the recording from the exact moment where my dad began talking about me being a genetic dead end. The room went completely silent as his voice filled the space, talking about how no woman wants damaged goods who can't give her children. You could have heard a pin drop as the recording continued, with Aunt Linda calling me a cautionary tale. My mom saying she'd stopped hoping for grandchildren from me after Carlos died. I watched their faces as they heard themselves tearing me apart. My dad's expression went from confusion to recognition to something that looked like panic. My mom covered her mouth when her own voice came through, talking about how Carlos had the good genes and I was just the leftover son. Michaela looked like she wanted to disappear when the recording reached her comments about me being useful for manual labor. When Reed's voice came through calling me the family charity case, he actually stood up like he was going to leave. But I told him to sit back down and listen to the rest. Uncle Rhett was staring at the floor when his joke about the GoFundMe played. The whole room was just frozen as their own words played back to them. When the recording ended, nobody spoke for probably a full minute. The silence was deafening. Finally, my dad tried to say something about how that conversation was taken out of context, that they were just worried about me and maybe expressed it poorly. I asked him to explain what context would make calling me a genetic dead end appropriate. My mom started crying and saying they never meant for me to hear that they were just venting frustrations and didn't really mean those things. I asked her which parts she didn't mean. The part about me being defective because of Carlos's accident, or the part about giving up hope for grandchildren from me. She couldn't answer. Michaela tried to apologize, saying she was just joking around and didn't realize how it sounded. I pointed out that she wasn't joking when she called, expecting me to do manual labor for her wedding planning. I asked her if she saw the connection between viewing me as only useful for physical tasks and then being upset when I stopped volunteering for that role. Reed attempted to defend himself by saying he was just trying to fit in with my family's conversation, that he didn't know me well enough to have real opinions about my life. I told him that made it worse, not better, that he felt comfortable mocking a stranger to score points with his future in-laws. The conversation that followed was brutal. Every single person in that room had to confront their own words and try to explain themselves. My dad kept insisting they were just concerned about my future and wanted me to be happy. I asked him how calling me damaged goods was supposed to help my happiness. Uncle Rhett said he was just going along with the conversation and didn't really think I was pathetic. I asked him why he thought it was okay to joke about my dating life with a group of people, whether he'd want his own personal struggles mocked at family gatherings. Aunt Linda tried to claim she was trying to motivate me to find someone. That tough love sometimes works better than coddling. I asked her if she'd ever tried actual love instead of tough love, if she'd ever had a genuine conversation with me about relationships, instead of just judging my life choices. The most heated exchange was with my mom. She kept saying she loved me and wanted the best for me, that everything she said came from a place of caring. I told her that if this was how she expressed love, I preferred indifference. I asked her to explain how comparing me unfavorably to my dead brother was supposed to help me feel loved and supported. She broke down completely at that point, sobbing about how losing Carlos had been so hard and she just wanted her remaining children to have the life he'd had. I told her that was her grief talking, not her love for me, and that she'd been taking out her loss on me for 3 years. The conversation went on for over 2 hours. Each family member tried to minimize their comments, explain them away, or shift blame to others. Nobody wanted to take full responsibility for how cruel they'd been. They all seemed more concerned with defending themselves than understanding how their words had affected me. When my dad suggested we should all just move past this and focus on repairing our relationships, I told him we weren't moving past anything until they acknowledged what they'd done and changed how they treated me. I said I wasn't going back to being their reliable manual labor while they mocked me behind my back. Michaela got upset and said she couldn't plan her wedding if I was going to hold grudges over stupid comments. I told her that was exactly the problem. She saw me as essential for wedding logistics but viewed my feelings as secondary to her convenience. I suggested she hire professionals to handle the tasks she'd been expecting me to do for free. By the time I left, nobody was happy with how things had gone. They all seemed to think I was being too harsh, that I should forgive and forget since they'd apologized. None of them seemed to understand that apologies don't erase the damage of learning how your family really sees you. The past week has been interesting. My parents have been texting constantly, alternating between more apologies and frustration that I won't just get over it. Michaela has been panicking about her wedding planning and keeps asking when I'm going to be ready to help again. Reed has been trying to stay out of it, but Michaela keeps dragging him into conversations about how unreasonable I'm being. Uncle Rhett actually seemed to get it more than the others. He called me a few days after the meeting and said he understood why I was angry, that hearing those comments would have hurt him too. He didn't try to pressure me to forgive everyone, just said he hoped we could rebuild our relationship on better terms. The most telling response came from Aunt Linda, who texted me saying I was being too sensitive and needed to develop thicker skin. She said families say things they don't mean sometimes, and I was making too big a deal out of it. I didn't bother responding because that message basically proved she hadn't learned anything from the conversation. What's really struck me this week is how they're all focused on getting me back to the old dynamic rather than addressing why that dynamic was problematic. They want me to forgive them so things can go back to normal, but normal was the problem. Normal was them taking advantage of my willingness to help while viewing me as a charity case behind my back. I've realized that this whole situation has shown me something important about my family. They don't actually want relationships with me. They want access to my labor and compliance. When I stopped providing those things, their main concern wasn't my well-being or happiness. It was how my unavailability affected their plans. The recording was nuclear because it removed any possibility of them denying or minimizing their real feelings about me. They can't claim they love and respect me when there's audio evidence of them calling me a genetic dead end and a cautionary tale. They can't pretend our relationships were healthy when there's proof they saw me as nothing more than useful manual labor. I'm still processing how to move forward from here. Part of me feels vindicated that I finally confronted them with the truth. But part of me is also grieving the family relationships I thought I had, even if they were built on false foundations. One thing I know for sure, I'm not going back to being their convenient problem solver while they mock me in private. They're going to have to figure out how to plan events and handle logistics without assuming I'll automatically say yes to any request. And if they can't accept that boundary, then we don't really have relationships worth preserving anyway. Final update. It's been 3 months since the family meeting where I played that recording, and I wanted to give you all a final update because the aftermath has been exactly what I expected and somehow still surprising. A lot of you have been asking how things turned out, and honestly, watching my family navigate life without their reliable manual labor source has been more educational than I anticipated. Let me start with the immediate fallout from that confrontation. The week after the family meeting was chaos. My phone was constantly buzzing with texts and calls from different family members, each trying their own approach to get me back to the old dynamic. My dad tried the guilt trip route, talking about family loyalty and how Carlos would be disappointed in how I was treating everyone. My mom went with emotional manipulation, sending long texts about how much she loved me and how she couldn't understand why I was punishing the whole family. Michaela alternated between anger and panic as her wedding date approached. She kept calling to ask when I was going to get over being upset and help with the setup. When I told her I'd already explained I wasn't available for that kind of work, she accused me of trying to ruin her special day out of spite. I pointed out that her special day shouldn't depend on me doing unpaid labor, and that seemed to genuinely confuse her. The most interesting response came from Reed. About 2 weeks after the family meeting, he actually showed up at my apartment to talk. He said he'd been thinking about what happened and realized he'd been completely out of line with his comments. He admitted he'd been trying to impress my family by going along with their conversation, but understood now how cruel and inappropriate that was. I appreciated that he took responsibility without making excuses, but I told him that understanding the problem and fixing it were two different things. I said if he wanted to be part of this family, he needed to think about what kind of dynamic he was supporting and whether he was comfortable being married into a family that operated this way. That conversation actually planted some seeds that became important later. Reed started paying attention to how my family treated me in ways he hadn't noticed before. He saw how they automatically assumed I'd handle physical tasks at gatherings, how they talked about my life decisions, how they positioned me as the reliable helper rather than an equal family member. Meanwhile, practical reality was setting in for everyone. Michaela's bridal shower was the first big test of how they'd handle events without me. My mom had been planning it for months with the assumption that I'd handle setup and breakdown. When I confirmed 2 weeks beforehand that I wouldn't be helping, she had to scramble to find alternatives. She ended up having to pay for a setup service, which cost her about $300 for something I'd been doing for free for years. The process was stressful because she'd never had to coordinate with outside vendors before. She'd always just told me what needed to be done, and I handled the logistics. The shower itself went fine, but I heard from Uncle Red afterward that my mom spent the whole event complaining about how expensive and complicated it was to hire help. She kept saying it wasn't the same as having family do it, that strangers didn't understand how she wanted things arranged. I didn't attend the shower, which was its own statement. When Michaela asked why I wasn't coming, I told her I wasn't comfortable at family events where I was only valued for manual labor. She said I was being dramatic, but the fact that she couldn't promise the dynamic would be different proved my point. The real turning point came about 6 weeks later when my parents needed help with a major house project. Their air conditioning system died during a heat wave, and they needed to move furniture and belongings out of several rooms so repair crews could access the ductwork. This was exactly the kind of situation where they'd normally call me first. My dad texted asking if I could help them move everything over the weekend. I replied that I wasn't available, but suggested they hire movers or ask some of the relatives who'd been at that engagement party conversation. He called me an hour later, frustrated and asking what they were supposed to do. I told him the same thing they'd been telling me my whole life. Figure it out. I said there were moving companies, handyman services, and other family members who could help. He said it wasn't the same as having someone who cared about their belongings handle the work. That phrase really stuck with me because it perfectly captured their mindset. They didn't want to pay for professional help because they viewed my free labor as superior due to my emotional investment in their well-being. But they'd never extended that same care to my emotional well-being when they were mocking me behind my back. They ended up hiring movers, which cost them about $800 for a job that would have taken me and maybe one other person a full weekend. More importantly, they had to coordinate the whole thing themselves, dealing with scheduling, logistics, and making sure nothing got damaged. My mom called me afterward, exhausted and frustrated with the whole experience. She said the movers were efficient but impersonal, that it felt weird having strangers handling their belongings. She mentioned several times how much easier it would have been if I'd helped, but seemed to finally understand that easier for them meant more work for me. Michaela's wedding planning became increasingly chaotic as the date approached. She'd built her entire timeline around having me available for setup, transportation, and coordination. When that fell through, she had to completely restructure her approach. Reed actually stepped up in ways that surprised everyone. He hired a wedding coordinator, arranged for professional setup services, and took on a lot of the logistics Michaela had been expecting me to handle. But the process was expensive and stressful in ways she hadn't anticipated. 3 weeks before the wedding, Michaela called me crying. She said planning everything was overwhelming and she didn't understand why I was making it harder by refusing to help. I reminded her that I wasn't making anything harder, I was just no longer making it easier for free. That conversation was important because it forced her to articulate what she actually wanted from me. She admitted she'd been counting on me to handle all the physical setup, coordinate vendor deliveries, and manage day of logistics. When I asked her what she'd been planning to contribute besides making decisions, she couldn't really answer. I told her I understood wedding planning was stressful, but that her stress didn't obligate me to provide free labor, especially after learning how she really viewed me. She asked what it would take for me to help, and I said it wasn't about negotiation, it was about respect. The wedding itself happened 2 weeks ago, and from what I heard, it went smoothly. Reed had hired enough help to cover everything that needed to be done. The professional vendors were efficient and reliable, probably more so than the family volunteer approach had ever been. I didn't attend the wedding, which was difficult but necessary. When Michaela asked why I wasn't coming, I told her I wasn't ready to celebrate with people who saw me as a cautionary tale and a charity case. She said those comments were in the past and I should move on, but I pointed out that none of them had actually changed how they treated me. The most significant change has been in my relationship with my parents. They've stopped asking me for help with projects, but they've also stopped inviting me to family dinners and gatherings. It's like they don't know how to interact with me outside the context of me being useful to them. My mom texted me last week saying she missed me and wanted to have lunch to talk. When we met, she spent most of the time trying to convince me that their comments at the engagement party didn't reflect their real feelings. She said families say things they don't mean when they're frustrated or worried. I asked her what they were frustrated about specifically. She said they worried I was wasting my potential by not settling down and starting a family. I pointed out that my potential was mine to manage, not theirs to worry about. I told her that if she wanted a relationship with me, it needed to be based on accepting who I am, not trying to change me into who they thought I should be. She asked what it would take for us to repair our relationship. I told her it would require her to see me as a complete person, rather than as a source of free labor or as a project to be fixed. I said I needed her to respect my life choices even if they weren't what she would choose for herself. The conversation didn't resolve anything, but it clarified where we stand. She wants things to go back to how they were, and I want them to be fundamentally different. Until she's willing to change how she sees me, we don't have much basis for a relationship. Uncle Rhett has been the one family member who's actually tried to understand my perspective. He called me a couple weeks after the wedding to check in. He said he'd been thinking about the whole situation and realized he'd never really seen me as a full person before, that he'd thought of me as the helpful nephew who was good at manual labor, but hadn't considered what I might want or need from family relationships. He apologized not just for his comments on the recording, but for years of taking my help for granted without offering anything meaningful in return. He asked if we could try to build a different kind of relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than me being useful to him. I appreciated his honesty and told him I was open to that. We've had a couple of conversations since then that felt more genuine than any interaction I'd had with family members in years. He actually asked about my work, my interests, my thoughts on things that had nothing to do with helping the family. The biggest realization for me has been how much of my identity was built around being the reliable helper. For years, I defined my worth through my willingness to drop everything for family needs. When I stopped doing that, I had to figure out who I was outside of that role. It's been liberating but also challenging. I've had to learn how to spend weekends on things I actually want to do, rather than whatever projects some family member needed help with. I've started traveling more, picked up hobbies I'd never had time for, and focused on building friendships outside my family circle. I'm also dating someone now, which feels significant. Her name is Michelle, and I met her through a hiking group I joined a few months ago. When I told her about the family situation, she was supportive, but also helped me see how much I'd been undervaluing myself in all my relationships, not just family ones. She pointed out that I spent a lot of time talking about what I could do for other people, but very little time talking about what I wanted for myself. That insight helped me understand that the family dynamic was just one part of a larger pattern, where I prioritized everyone else's needs over my own. Looking back on these 3 months, I'm struck by how much my family's behavior proved my point. When I stopped being useful to them, most of them stopped making effort to maintain relationships with me. The people who were angry about my boundary setting were the ones who'd been benefiting most from my lack of boundaries. The family members who've been willing to respect my limits are the ones I still have relationships with. Uncle Red has become someone I actually enjoy talking to now that our interactions aren't centered around him needing help with something. Even Reed has shown more genuine interest in who I am as a person than most of my blood relatives ever did. My parents and Michaela are still hoping this is a phase that I'll get over. They keep making comments about how family forgives and forgets, how I should let go of past hurts for the sake of maintaining relationships. But they're not offering to change anything about how they treat me. They just want me to accept their treatment. I've realized that some family relationships aren't worth preserving if they're built on inequality and disrespect. The people who truly care about me have been willing to examine their behavior and make changes. The people who just want me to go back to being convenient haven't earned the right to be in my life. 3 months ago, I was the family charity case who was useful for manual labor. Today, I'm a person with boundaries who chooses how to spend his time and energy. The people who can respect that choice get to be part of my life. The people who can't are learning to hire movers and wedding coordinators. It turns out that standing up for yourself doesn't destroy family relationships. It reveals which relationships were worth having in the first place. And honestly, the ones that remain are so much better than what I had before that I wish I'd done this years ago. For anyone dealing with similar family dynamics, my advice is simple. Your time and energy have value, and you deserve to be treated with respect. If people can't offer you that basic courtesy, then they don't deserve access to what you have to offer. Sometimes the best way to show people your worth is to stop giving it away for free.